Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Brandon, and today I want to talk about how we can set up a basic Active Directory domain on some virtual machines. Now, I do want to go over some Active Directory attacks in later videos on the channel, so I think it's only fair that I show you how I'm going to set my domain up so you can follow along and we can go through and learn all this together. Now, before we get started, I do want to tell you I just started a Discord server a little earlier this week. I'll leave the invite below down in the description. It is free and open for anybody to join. We've been having a lot of fun there, so please join. We've got some other content creators in there as well, so a lot of great discussions going on there. Now, to get started, there's going to be two ISO files that we're going to have to install so that we can actually install, a Windows server and a Windows client. Now, I'm going to be using Windows 2016 server. No particular reason behind it. It's just what I've done in the past, so we'll go ahead and do that. I'm not too worried about security right off the bat, since we're going to be using it to mess around and break some things in the future. Now, I'll leave the link below in the description also to the download for the Windows Evaluation Center, but we want to scroll down to this Windows Server 2016 and select ISO and then hit continue. You should be able to enter a little bit of your information, like your name, company you represent, or whatever, and then download it. I've, of course, done that already to save us some time. Now, the next thing we need to download is a Windows 10 ISO. So again, I'll leave the link down below so you can go ahead and download that. Each ISO file is about 6 gigs, so it could take a little while to download. Now, if you're browsing to this site from a Windows device, it's actually going to prompt you to, install this Create Windows 10 Installation Media tool instead of an ISO. I think that's a little bit annoying, and I don't like doing that. So a cool little trick to get around that is if you just go to Inspect Element and click on these little dots up in this corner over here, we can go to More Tools and Network Conditions. What we're going to do is just change our user agent. So let's see, right now, let's change it to, I set it to BlackBerry to test this before. I'm going to set it to BlackBerry again, just something that's not a Windows device, because if it doesn't think we're coming from a Windows device, it'll just let us download the ISO instead of downloading the tool and have to go through all of that. So let's set the user agent to a BlackBerry device, and I'm going to hit Control R just to refresh the page. And now you can see we actually get a prompt to select, our Windows 10 edition. We can confirm that and go through, select your language, and download it from there. So that way you don't have to go through and get the actual tool installed. So now I have both ISO files downloaded. I'm going to go over to my ESXi server, and we're going to create some new virtual machines. Now, keep in mind, this process is going to be pretty much the same no matter what hypervisor you're using. So if you're following along at home and you're using VirtualBox or you're just using VMware Desktop, that's totally fine. The only difference is you're going to have some different settings when you deploy the virtual machine. But if you're familiar with using VirtualBox, then it should be no biggie. It's basically your standard install process. And if you're not familiar with using VirtualBox, I suggest you go check out the first episode in my Home Lab series, where I show you how to install an Ubuntu virtual machine. And the process for doing that in this Windows one will be pretty much the exact same thing as far as setting up the VM go. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our Windows 2016 domain controller. So let's just give this a quick name here. Let's put it as, we'll just call it Windows 2016, since that's the name of it. The guest family will do Windows, and let's see, we should be able to find Windows 2016 here. Where is it? There we go. Windows 2016, 64-bit, that's what I have downloaded. Now we can hit next through here. Just pick a data store of where to put it. And let's see, let's give it, I don't know, we'll say 40 gigs of, actually, I'm going to bump this up to 60 gigs of hard drive space, and I'll give it 6 gigs of RAM. Now, of course, this can vary depending on what your, hardware setup is. I've got quite a lot of free resources available, so I'm going to give it, a little bit more. But actually, I'm going to bump this up to 8 gigs of RAM just to be safe. Again, you can mess around with how low you want to put it. Since I'm going to be installing a graphical version of the Windows server, I'm going to give it some more RAM just so we don't have any slowdowns or anything. And let's see, choose a network adapter. I'm just going to put this on my VM network, and we should be good to go. The only thing we have to change, of course, is the ISO of where we want it to come from. So we'll go pick, let's see, Windows Server 2016 ISO. That's good. You can see, again, that's about 6.5 gigs. So again, it can take a little bit to download if you have slow internet connection. So now we should just be able to hit next through here and finish that up. We should see our Windows 2016 pop up here, and we can power that on. So now we're going to actually have to go through the install process and install this, Windows 2016 server. So I'm going to launch a remote console here. That's going to open up my VMware workstation. Now we're just going to be remoted into the virtual machine. So hopefully in a few seconds this will pop up. Perfect. So here is our VM. Of course, you can select your language, keyboard method, and all that. That'll, of course, vary depending on where you are located. And just go ahead and hit install now. Now, there are ways to do this in an automated fashion. I do have some scripts to do this automatically, deploying a Windows 2016 domain controller and a Windows 10 workstation and adding that to the domain. But maybe we'll get into that in a later video. For this, I just want to go through and do it manually because the whole point of us having this home lab is so that we can learn and set things up like this so we know how they really work. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the standard evaluation desktop experience here. So that means we do want the basically the standard Windows server, and we do want a desktop GUI environment installed on there. That's going to make it a lot easier, especially starting out with getting around the Windows environment. Go ahead and accept these license terms, and we want to do a custom install with Windows only. We'll just select the one drive that we have allocated, and that should start the install. All right, so that took about a minute or two to install, and then it actually automatically went and rebooted the VM. And once it started back up, this is the screen that we are presented with. So I didn't do anything off camera, don't worry. We're going to be prompted now to set an administrator password. Of course, set that to whatever you'd like to. Now, what I'm going to do is, let's see. Just going to set this to something basic for now. We can go ahead and change it later. Let's see, we should be good to finalize that. And now we have our Windows 2016 server. So I should be able to, I think I actually have to go to the VM. Yeah, send Control-Alt-Delete here. You probably have something similar in VirtualBox because usually if you hit Control-Alt-Delete, it won't work. So you have to go to like some keys tab or something like that to send the Control-Alt-Delete. So now we should be able to log in and everything should be set up just fine. So since we had the eval, version of Windows, we didn't have to go through any of the licensing or all that, which is awesome. But our image is only valid for 180 days. So this is good for a lab environment like what we are building, but if you can't really run this at home and expect it to be dependable and last for a long time. So now what we can do is start to install the domain services on here and promote this to a domain controller. So just because it's a Windows server does not mean it is inherently a domain controller, of course. We have to actually configure that service on here. So what we can do is go to the server manager, which should pop up automatically, and go to add roles and features. Now we should just be able to hit next through here. And we want to do a role-based or feature-based installation, which is the default. We'll hit next. Here is the name and the IP address of our server. That's the only one that we have here, so we'll hit next. And what we want to install is the Active Directory domain services. So we'll check that off. Now it's going to pop up and say, hey, here's all these other dependencies of things that we need to install in order to install the Active Directory domain services. So we'll just leave this by default and hit add features. And then we can next through here. And again, through here, everything that is needed and completely necessary will be checked off by default. So we can just go ahead and hit next. Now we can go back at any time and install additional features, which we most likely will do as we build out different Active Directory attacks in our lab. So we'll just go ahead and hit next through here again. And we'll hit install. And we should be good to go. Now, a cool thing down here is you can export the configuration settings. So this will give you like a really nice PowerShell one-liner and a config file that you can use to automatically install the domain settings that you choose in the future. So this would be great if you're wanting to automate the installation process of your Windows domain controller. Again, which is something I have done and I might be able to share later on if people are interested in that kind of thing. So I'll get back to you guys once this install is finished. Hopefully it won't take too long. All right, so we are back here. This didn't take too long at all. And now you can see it says configuration required, installation succeeded on our machine name. Now we'll go ahead and change that a little bit later, but that's fine for now. So we can hit close. And now we can see this little flag pops up here in the notifications. And it says, the configuration is required. Do you want to promote this to a domain controller? And we do. So let's go ahead and click on this little link that it gives us right here. And this should prompt us with a deployment configuration window. Now, since we don't have any existing forest or anything like that, we do need to add a new forest. Now, for our root domain name, I'm just going to put conda.local. So everything in our domain will be whatever the server name is or client name .conda.local. And you can set that to whatever you want. So now we can configure things such as the functional level of the forest in the domain. So this is good if you need your domain to be backwards compatible with an older domain controller, an older forest. But since we only have this one and it's 2016, that's perfectly fine. We'll leave it as so. And we do want to, let's see, keep the DNS server on there. And if we need the global catalog by default, we do need to run DNS on our domain controller since you do need DNS in your domain. And since our domain controller is the only machine in the domain right now, of course, it's going to be needing to run the DNS server. And we can also set our directory services restore mode password here. So again, set that to anything you want. Just make sure you remember it. And we can hit next and go through there. All right, and for the DNS options, let's just leave this to what it is by default, and we'll hit next. The next thing we need to specify is the NetBIOS domain name. I'm going to leave mine to the default of Conda, and I think that is fine for me. So now we need to specify some of the locations for the log and database files. I'm just going to leave these to what they are set to by default again. Now, we should be able to just next through this as well. And now it's actually going to go through and install the domain controller on here. Well, after it finishes these prerequisite checks. So hopefully these shouldn't take too long and we should be able to hit install after. Awesome. So here it is. It looks like everything is okay. We get some warnings, but let's see, it looks to be about DNS, but it should be okay by default. The checks did pass successfully. So let's go ahead and hit install. Now this could take a few minutes to complete. And again, we can go back and configure our domain as we wish later on. I just want to go through a very basic installation. We'll go through and install the bare minimum required to get a Windows 2016 domain controller and a Windows 10 client added to it. As we go through and do different attacks and build out our environment a little bit more, we can start to add different features to it or remove features, maybe remove some security features in order to simulate some misconfigurations and get some attacks working. All right, and now that our machine has finished being promoted to a domain controller and it has rebooted itself, you can see upon reboot, we are greeted with a new login page where we are signing into the actual domain as indicated by the NetBIOS name being right here. So we can go ahead and enter our administrator password that we set before. And now we should be able to log in and we are in our brand new Windows 2016 domain controller. This is very cool. The first thing that we should do is add a new user. So let's go over to Tools and we'll go to Active Directory Users and Computers. So from here, we can start to add different domain users that we can use to log in as when we start getting our Windows 10 client set up. So I'm going to right click on users here and let's click on new. We'll click on user and now we can create a new user. So let's have a user. We'll just call it please and the last name of subscribe. So we have that set up there and let's see, the user logon name, we'll just have it as subscribe. And then we can go ahead and hit next. Now it's going to ask us to set a password. So let's set that here. All right. Awesome. And then I'm going to actually uncheck this box here for user must change password at next logon. We don't want to do that. It's okay if the passwords aren't great for now. And we'll hit next. Now we should be able to hit finish and it will create that new user. Awesome. So now if you see in our view of users here, we have the please subscribe user. So that's about all there is to our Windows 2016 domain controller. It's all set up and ready to go. The only thing we need to do is get our Windows 10 client and join it to the domain. So I'm going to pop right back over to ESXi and open up a new virtual machine. So let's just hit next through here. Let's just call this our Windows 10 client. And let's see, the guest OS family, of course, it's going to be Windows. And it will be Windows 10 64-bit. Now, again, if you're doing this in VirtualBox or in a whatever kind of hypervisor you want, it's totally fine. It'll work with whatever. But you do need to make sure that the two machines are on the same network because, of course, the client needs to be able to talk to the domain controller in order to handle authentication, DNS, things like that. So if you're doing it on VirtualBox, I would recommend putting them both on the same network. Or even better, having two separate adapters, put both on a separate NAT, and then have an internal network that the two machines can talk between. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let's hit next. And okay, we'll specify the data store we want to create our virtual machine on. Now, I'm going to give this 8 gigs of RAM to start out. And let's see, hard disk space, let's give it, I don't know, we'll say 50 gigs should be fine. And I'm going to put this on the VM network as well. Again, they have to be on the same network so they can communicate with each other. And then let's choose the ISO file that we have for Windows 10. There we go. So now we should be able to hit next and everything should be all set and finish. Awesome. So our Windows 10 client is going to pop up down here. Let's power that on. And I'm also going to launch a remote console into that. So that's pretty cool. If you didn't know that, if you have an ESXi server in VMware Workstation, you can use Workstation as a remote session into your server. So even though I'm accessing these VMs on my desktop, they're actually running on my server. So it doesn't take any, work power away from my desktop. So of course, select whatever, language, time, keyboard input that would apply to you and select next. And now we're going to hit install now. Now, shortly, we're going to be prompted for a license key. Now, we're not going to be giving Windows a license right now, which is perfectly okay in our lab environment. There are some restrictions that come into place when you are not using a licensed version of Windows, but I don't think we should run into any problems here. If you do, we can use a KMS key or a bulk volume key. So if you look up a Windows 10 KMS key, you will see that Microsoft actually provides bulk volume licensing keys that can be used to get through this get through this installation process, and supplying the KMS keys will help in the automation process. But when you use a KMS key, Microsoft does expect that this machine will be getting a license key later on from a valid licensing server. But for now, let's just select I don't have a product key to get us to this installation. Now, we're going to be using the Windows 10 Pro Edition. I believe you need Pro or Education to be joined to a domain. I don't think it will work with Home, although I could be wrong. I haven't tested it in quite some time, but I'm going to stick with Windows 10 Pro. We'll accept these license terms and hit Next. Now, again, we're going to do the custom install, and we'll select the one drive that we have allocated and select Next. Now, here's going to be the installation process again, very similar to what we did for the domain controller, and this will just take a few minutes, so I'll cut to when that is finished. Awesome. So our install of Windows 10 just finished, and of course, we're going to have a bunch of questions to answer to set the operating system up. So of course, select the region that would apply to you. And moving forward, there's going to be a bunch more prompts. It should be some pretty basic information to fill out, but it's the standard stuff that you would need to set up, any operating system. So of course, your keyboard layout as well. I'm not going to add a secondary keyboard. All right, so once we get here, I'm going to click Set up for personal use and select Next. Now, hopefully, we should be able to get around using a Microsoft account. We'll just use a local account. So let's see. So, of course, it's going to want us to sign into a Microsoft account, but we can go down here and click Offline Account. Now, once we do that, we should be prompted to add a local account because we don't want to tie any of our real personal stuff into this account. Now, again, they're going to try to get you to sign in with a Microsoft account again. Well, let's click down here and select Limited Experience. Even though I think it's a little bit better that we're not putting our personal information in our lab, but hey, maybe that's just me. So we can just enter an account name here. I'm just going to put in Conda, and we'll hit next. Here's our password, so we can create that. All right, so there's that. One more time, because of course I always have typos and everything. And then we're going to need to create some security questions. I'm just going to kind of skip through these and put, let's see, I don't know. We'll just put an A for all the answers because that's secure, right? Why not? It's all right. We're going to be joining this machine to a domain as well. So we won't really be using this local account, and we can probably get rid of it in the future. But it is something that we have to put on there just to install the operating system at first. Now we should be prompted to configure all the privacy settings. I'm going to disable pretty much all of this. Personally, I don't want to send any of this data, especially in the lab environment. So I'm just going to get rid of all of these and make it not personalized at all so that none of our data is being sent to the Microsoft servers. Now, it's totally fine if you want to leave that stuff on, but for me, I just choose not to. Now, I also don't want to use Cortana. I find that pretty annoying, especially in our lab environment. We should have no need to have any voice commands or anything like that going on. So now we should be prompted with the actual Windows 10, home screen here. So the first thing we want to do is join the machine to the domain. So I'm going to look up just rename in here, and you'll see this view your PC name. Let's click on this. Let's get rid of this little pop-up for Edge. And if we scroll down, we should see this rename this PC Advanced. Now, what we're going to do is the first thing we want to do is change. Let's see, we'll click on change here. Let's change the computer name. We'll just set this to Win 10-1. It'll be our Windows 10 machine and number 1 of however many we decide to add. We'll click on OK there. Now, I'm not sure if you have to restart your machine for it to, yeah, so you do have to restart the machine for these changes to be applied. So I'm going to click on OK and close. Now let's go ahead and restart this machine. Once the server name is actually changed, then we can go ahead and join it to the domain. All right, so our machine just started back up, so we can go ahead and log back in. And now we should be able to start the process of joining the machine to our domain. Now, what we're going to have to do is actually go grab the IP of our Windows server. So let's go back to our Windows 2016 here and log back in just so we can get the IP address from there. All right, so we should be able to log right back in. And let's just open up a command prompt and we'll type in ipconfig. Oh, we'll see if make sure I can spell that correctly. All right, so we are at 192.168.1.179. Okay, so let's go back to our Windows 10 machine. Now let's click on this network tab here and go to network and internet settings. Now you might have multiple adapters depending on how you set your VM up, but I'm just working off this one Ethernet 0 adapter. So I'm going to go ahead and click on properties. Now what we have to do is actually change the DNS server of where this is pointing to point to the domain controller. So we need to be using the domain controller as a DNS server in order to join to the domain. So let's see. We should be able to edit the properties here. Maybe this is the wrong place to go. What if we right click on this and open internet settings? Let's see. Yeah, that's where we just were. So let's go to change adapter options. That looks like what we need. And let's click on this. We'll right click and click on properties. There we go. So once we're in here, we can go to Internet Protocol version 4. And let's double click on that. And here you'll see the DNS server. So let's click on use the following DNS server address. So we want to statically set this. And we'll go to 192. Oh, let's see. We'll go to 192.168.1. What was the last octet there? 179. Awesome. So 179. Oh, let's see. Maybe not. No. Oh, got to click in the VM. That'll help. Awesome. So there we go. So there's our DNS server, and let's click on OK, and we should be good to go. Awesome. So now let's close out of all of this stuff. And now to actually join the domain, let's go back to that renaming tab. So we'll look up rename. We'll click on this. And let's see. Let's scroll all the way back down to rename this PC advanced. And see right here it says to rename this computer or change its domain or work group, click change. So right here, we're going to click on change. We have the computer name that we want. Let's check off this domain because we want to join to the new domain. And our domain name was conda.local. So that's the domain we're going to be joining to. Now, since we are pointing our Windows 10 machine to our domain controller as a DNS server, it will be able to resolve this automatically and should be able to join the domain. Now, we do need credentials of the administrator account on the domain. So let's just type in administrator and the password. All right. So as long as those credentials are correct, it says, all right, welcome to the conda.local domain. So it looks like the domain join was successful. So now all we have to do is restart our machine again. After we close this window, we should be prompted. And once the machine restarts, we should be joined to the conda.local domain. All right, so our Windows 10 machine has just restarted. And you can see now when we go to sign in, well, since I've already signed into the Please Subscribe account already, it shows up. But you should just be seeing the local account that you created before. So if you go down to other user, you can now see we can sign into the domain as indicated by the NetBIOS name here. So I'm going to sign in as the subscribe user that we created earlier. And then let's just enter in the password there. Okay. Oh, wrong password. Let me try that one more time. Awesome. There we go. So now you can see we are on our Windows 10 machine. And we can now sign in with the domain user account that we created on the server. So that is awesome. That indicates that our machine was successfully joined to the domain because we just signed into an account that wasn't even created on this machine. So that's basically it. We now have a working Active Directory domain on 2 virtual machines. We have a Windows 2016 domain controller and a Windows 10 client joined to the domain. Now you could add a bunch more clients if you want to the domain, or a bunch more user accounts and things like that. And in future videos, we're going to be using this base configuration to start doing some different attacks in Active Directory. So I really hope that you found this video useful. If you did, please remember to like and subscribe down below. If you haven't joined the Discord already, please check that out. Come chat with us and learn some new things there. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.